The man who called himself Cal stood on Eliza's porch, hat in hand, asking for work. He was clean, which was the first oddity. Not just washed, but scrubbed in a way that spoke of habit rather than a recent, desperate effort at a creek's edge. His clothes were worn, but of a fine weave, the kind that held its shape long after the dye had faded. And his boots, though scuffed at the toes and heels to appear well-traveled, were made by a master cobbler. Eliza had buried a husband who wore boots until the soles were memories. She knew the difference between honest wear and deliberate distress. He said he was a drifter, looking for a steady wage to see him through the season. He could mend fence, chop wood, handle stock. His voice was the second oddity. It was low and even, without the hard, clipped cadence of a man used to shouting over the wind or the lowing of cattle. It was the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to in quiet rooms. Eliza's boarding house, the sturdiest structure on the main street of Judith's Landing, was in constant need of mending. The porch rail was loose, the back fence sagged, and the woodpile was a monument to her dwindling supply of energy. She needed a man's strength, but she was a widow of 32, and she knew the calculations that went on in a man's mind when he looked at a woman with a property of her own, no matter how modest. "I can offer room and board," she said, her tone as practical as a bill of lading, "and $2 a week for any work I see fit to give you. You'll take your meals with the other boarders. No liquor in the rooms. No trouble." "That's fair," he said. He met her gaze directly, and his eyes were the third and most telling oddity. They were clear gray, steady, and assessing. They weren't the eyes of a desperate man. They were the eyes of a buyer, a man weighing the value of a thing before making an offer. And in that moment, Eliza understood. This was a performance. She did not know the reason for it, but she recognized the artifice as surely as she recognized the scent of pine on the wind. Some local talk had drifted in about Caleb Astor, the cattle baron from the braided river valley, a man so wealthy he was rumored to shoe his prize stallion with silver, a man who, tired of being courted for his land and his fortune, had reportedly vanished. A flicker of something, not amusement, but a sharp, keen interest stirred within her. Very well. Let him play his part. She would play hers. She was a woman who had learned to test the soundness of a beam before putting her weight on it. She would test the soundness of this man. "You can start with the woodpile," she said, nodding toward the back of the house. "Your room is the last one on the left upstairs. Supper is at 6. He simply nodded, put on his hat, and walked toward the axe leaning against the shed. He thought he was beginning his deception. Eliza knew she was beginning her inspection. For the first few weeks, Cal worked with a quiet, relentless diligence. He was not fast, but he was thorough. When he repaired the porch rail, he didn't just nail it back in place. He replaced the rotted wood, sanded the new piece smooth, and ensured it was as solid as the day the house was built. He chopped wood with a steady, rhythmic swing, stacking it in a way that would keep it dry and allow the air to move through. These were not the hurried, half-finished jobs of a man working only for his keep. They were the actions of a man who understood the value of a thing well made. Eliza watched him from the kitchen window as she kneaded bread or peeled potatoes. She watched his hands. They were strong, but they learned the work. The first week they blistered. He never complained, but she saw him soaking them in a basin of salt water at night, his face set in a tight mask of endurance. By the third week, calluses had begun to form, layering over the soft skin of a man who had likely spent more time holding reins of Spanish leather than the rough handle of an axe. At the dinner table, he was a quiet presence among the other boarders, a traveling salesman, 2 minors waiting for a new claim to open, and a young school teacher. He listened more than he spoke, his gaze moving from face to face as they talked of land prices, railroad speculation, and local gossip. One evening, the salesman, a man named Henderson with a slick smile and a louder waistcoat, tried to draw Cal into a scheme involving a supposed silver strikes up in the Bear Paw Mountains. "A man like you, Cal, a working man, this is your chance to get ahead," Henderson boomed, slapping the table. "Just a small investment, and in 6 months you'll be sitting pretty." Cal finished chewing a piece of bread, took a slow sip of water, and then looked at Henderson. "What's the name of the assay office that certified the claim?" he asked, his voice soft. Henderson sputtered. "Well, it's a new find. Things are still informal." "And the water rights? Who holds them for the sluicing operation?" "That's all being worked out, my boy. Details. "Seems to me," Cal said, placing his fork neatly beside his plate, "that water rights and a certified assay are the foundation, not the details." He looked at Henderson with that same unnervingly steady gaze. "I prefer to build on solid ground." The table fell silent. Henderson's face turned a blotchy red, and he quickly changed the subject. From across the table, Eliza met Cal's eyes for a brief second. He gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement that they both knew Henderson was selling snake oil. A ghost of a smile touched Eliza's lips before she turned her attention back to her plate. He wasn't just playing a part. He was inhabiting it with an integrity that surprised her. The test came not from a man, but from the sky. In late May, a week of unseasonable torrential rain sent the Judith River spilling over its banks. The floodwaters didn't reach the main street, but the ground became a sodden sponge. One morning, Eliza woke to a groaning sound from below. In the root cellar, a section of the stone foundation had given way, and muddy water was seeping in, threatening her winter stores of potatoes, onions, and preserves. It was a catastrophe. The cost of a stonemason and new lumber would wipe out her savings and more. She stood in the damp, earthy-smelling darkness, the cold reality of her situation pressing down on her. She was alone, as this property, this life she had carefully pieced back together after her husband's death, was fragile. The boarders offered clumsy words of sympathy. Henderson even suggested a loan at an interest rate that made her stomach clench. Cal said nothing at all. He stood beside her looking at the collapsed wall, his jaw tight. For a moment, a cold disappointment washed over Eliza. This was it. This was the moment he would break character. He would reach into some hidden pocket, produce a fat roll of bills, and solve her problem with the casual ease of the wealthy. He would rescue her, and, in doing so, prove that he was Caleb Astor after all, a man who solved problems with money, not with his hands. He would fail the test. He was quiet all through a somber supper. Afterwards, as she sat on the porch, staring into the gathering dusk, he came and stood near the rail he had so carefully mended. "The damage is bad," he said, not looking at her. "But the main beams are sound. The wall can be rebuilt." Eliza didn't answer. She waited. "We'll have to shore up the west side first before we clear the rockfall," he continued, his voice taking on that methodical, practical tone she'd heard him use before. "There's good stone in the creek bed, better than what was used before. We can haul it. I can trade some work with Miller down at the sawmill for the lumber we'll need. It will be slow work." He finally turned to look at her, his gray eyes clear in the twilight. "But we can do it." He had said we. He had not offered to buy her solution. He had offered to build it with her. He had seen her not as a damsel in distress, but as a partner in a difficult task. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes, hot and sharp. She blinked them away fiercely. She had not cried when her husband died, and she would not cry now. Instead, a slow, profound warmth spread through her chest, a feeling so unfamiliar she didn't recognize it at first. It was trust. "When do we start?" she asked, her voice perfectly even. For the next 3 weeks they worked. They became a team, moving with an economy of motion and language that felt more intimate than any conversation. He did the heavy lifting, setting the stones in a bed of fresh mortar while she cleared debris, mixed the mortar, and handed him his tools. They worked in the cool, damp earth, side by side, rarely speaking. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the rhythmic scrape of a trowel, the thud of a hammer, the shared weight of a heavy beam. In these quiet hours, Eliza saw the man stripped of all pretense. She saw the sweat on his brow, the dirt ground deep into the lines of his hands, the focused set of his jaw as he measured a cut. He was no longer Caleb Astor, the wealthy rancher, or Cal, the drifter. He was simply the man who was rebuilding her foundation, and in doing so, was laying a new one between them. The day they finished, they stood together in the cellar, the new wall solid and pale against the old dark stones. The air smelled of damp earth and curing mortar. It was done. It was whole again. That evening they sat on the porch, the air sweet with the scent of honeysuckle. The sun had set, leaving streaks of violet and rose across the sky. The silence felt different now, comfortable and complete. Eliza looked at his hands resting on his knees. They were a working man's hands now, calloused and stained,